Welcome to the world of cymatic technologies, where we explore the science of sound and vibrational healing.
I want to preface all of this with Mandara mentioned that I work with medical doctors, and so even though we in cymotherapy talk about sound and music and vibration and resonance, most medical doctors, although the ones I work with really believe that this all works, they don't want to hear about something is now resonating with something else. They want to hear things in medical terms. So I will be using some medical terms, not that I'm a doctor. In Ohio, I have a limited licensed medical practitioner certificate from the medical board. And so a lot of the things, the background that I come from is to put things in medical terms. I've worked in several doctors' clinics. I have several doctors that refer to me. And rather than make myself crazy trying to translate back and forth, I just describe them in medical terms because that's what they want to hear when I report back to them on what their patient is doing or feeling or however they are. Okay, the title of this is A Stolen Life. Unable to drive, unable to read, unable to cook, unable to medicate self, unable to speak in complete sentences, unable to remember family names, unable to identify or communicate pain signals. Diagnosis, Alzheimer's disease. The patient was sent to me actually by her husband's physician. She had to accompany her husband everywhere he went because she could not be left alone. And the doctor mentioned to him that she really thought his wife should come to see me because at the point that she had reached, she responded to him. He would tell her to do something and she would do it. He would ask her a question. Sometimes she would say yes. Sometimes she would say no. Sometimes she would say yes when she meant no and no when she meant yes. So she was rapidly degenerating in her ability to communicate with her husband, with her family. And his doctor said, you know what? I think we got something that might help. So he gave me a call and we scheduled her in. This is a quote from a book that I ran across, and it just so describes the process of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's can be called the long goodbye. You grieve about the loved one from the moment you begin to observe the gradual loss of memory and the speech and personality changes because they are incurable. The person you love is gradually changing before your eyes. You say goodbye many times until the final goodbye at death. And this is so true of anyone. If you've ever worked with anyone with any kind of long-term debilitating illness, it takes such an emotional toll to see just little pieces of them kind of evaporating, just kind of disintegrating in front of your eyes. This is a picture that I got from the web. I actually did get permission. On the left, you'll see a normal brain, and on the right, you'll see one with Alzheimer's disease where there's a significant portion that is not firing, is not functioning. The yellow and the red, this is the PET scan, and the yellow and the red shows there's some kind of activity going on, and the blue and dark spaces are where there's not electrical stuff going on, and you can see on the right there are lots of blue spaces. Donna is a 75-year-old female. She's diabetic, which I didn't find out till way later after the Simon sessions made her diabetes better. And her husband mentioned to me, I was like, you didn't put that on the intake form. So they don't always put it on the intake form. She had a right-sided limp, nocturnal incontinence, insomnia. She was able to follow most of her husband's directions, but she was unresponsive to directions from others. She was a former home ec teacher, and being a good home ec teacher from the 50s and 60s, she used only cast aluminum, club aluminum, excellent cookware. That's all they ever used. And for those of you that know anything about Alzheimer's, one of the Things that they are finding when they do autopsies on Alzheimer's patients is there's a large amount of aluminum present in the system. She had multiple mercury dental fillings. Mercury has also been linked to lots of neurological and brain dysfunction. She lived abroad. They spent time traveling. She spent a considerable amount of time, a couple of years, living in India. And her husband was battling his third occurrence of cancer, so there was a stressor there. Oftentimes in Alzheimer's, if you look at the history, you oftentimes find people who may be wanting to I'm overwhelmed, I'm just backing up from this. And so the thought was there, and her daughter even mentioned that after her dad's cancer was diagnosed for a third time, that her mother got way worse, like overnight. It was like this huge shift, as though she was like, I can't deal with any more of this. The initial treatment regimen that she and her husband had tried were chiropractic adjustments, supplements, homeopathic remedies, and prayer. And for a while, she got improvement with some of these treatments, and then at the point that she came to see me, nothing seemed to be helping. So, a stolen life returned, enter simotherapy. Considerations that I looked at were the cast aluminum pots, the dental fillings, possible we've all got parasites, but some countries seem to have the notoriety of having more than others, so the fact that she lived in India in the 50s was a consideration for parasites. She also lives in a rural area. There are lots of farms around them. There are lots of, we currently in Ohio have a lake that is completely dead. Lake St. Mary's is dead, done, out the door, cannot swim, cannot fish. Pets have died drinking from it just in the last 2 years because of pesticide runoffs from the farms. Wow. And there are several state parks that have been closed this year in Ohio for exactly the same reason. It's a huge farming belt, and
how many farms have been closed?
Pardon?
How many farms have been closed?
Zippo. Also, Donna had type 2 diabetes, which I found out later, and again the thing with the cancer. Day 3 after her initial session, her husband called and he said her sleep time had increased. Instead of sleeping for an hour or two and then waking up and waking him up, she was actually sleeping about 5 or 6 hours through the night. Her attention span was longer so that she could follow what he was telling her to do. She was less restless after the initial first day of being super restless. She had an increased interest in television. Previously, she could not focus long enough to even, you know how people do with little kids, they put them in front of the TV to entertain them so that you can get something done. That had been his coping technique. He's in his 80s, and his coping technique so that he could wash and cook and clean and do everything that needed to be done and take care of her was to put her in front of the TV, put something on, and while she was watching TV, then he could go out and cook dinner and do a few things that needed to be done in the house. And that had stopped. That was another reason that he was kind of at his wit's end. And so he said she was more interested in TV. He could now go from the living room to the kitchen and go cook food quickly, or go throw a load of laundry in without worrying that she was wandering around somewhere getting into something hazardous. And he scheduled a second appointment for day 7. Within 1 week he wanted to schedule again. Okay. By the 3rd month, they came every single week for a total of 6 months. Every single week they came. They drove almost 2.5 hours to get to my house. By the 3rd month, she could fix her own cereal. She knew when she was hungry. Wasn't always breakfast, but when she was hungry, she could get the bowl, she could get the cereal. Couldn't do the sugar thing, so he had to get the Frosted Flakes or whatever. But she could do the milk, the cereal, the bowl, and the spoon, and feed herself when she was hungry, which was tremendous because at the point at which she came, she couldn't even tell him when she was hungry. Just when she got fussy, like a little baby gets fussy and you think maybe they need to be fed. That's how he would give her snacks. So she was able to get her own snacks, which was really good. By month 4, she had mastered not only cereal, but the toaster. She could put toast in the toaster and actually put either jelly or peanut butter or something on it. By the 5th month, she could put a sandwich together and do a 2-step process of sandwich and chips. So she could do the whole thing with the sandwich and get a bag of chips out and fix herself a meal. And by month 6, she was able to order from a menu in the restaurant. So she had regained her ability to read the menu and figure out what it was and decide what she wanted. So much more complex, higher order thinking was now in place. Okay. Here in the reading area, month 3, her daughter called to say that her mother was reading the newspaper with comprehension, and I said, is that something she hasn't done? And she said, every day of my life, I came home from school and my mother was sitting at the kitchen table reading the paper. She said, after she got Alzheimer's, she continued to sit at the table with the paper because she kind of knew that was something she was supposed to do, but she said she wasn't reading. She'd sit for 20 minutes and never turn a page. She said, I came in the other day and she said, you are not going to believe what they are doing. And she slammed the paper down, and at that point, Ohio had a lottery thing on the ballot, and they were trying to vote to make a statewide gambling be part of the Ohio Constitution. Not a law that you could do it, but put it into the Constitution. Yeah, and her mother was just fuming. She's like, we should be voting on this for a law. This is not like an amendment to the Constitution. What's wrong with these people? And she was just going on and on and on. And Laura said she just stood there going, oh my God, my mom had to have read that because there's no other way she could be, livid that they're doing this in a and she said, these stupid people, and she was just going on and on and on. So she was very excited that her mother was very irritated at the way they were putting up the whole gambling thing in Ohio. And by month 5, she was attending Bible study again and able to read and comment on what was going on in Bible study. She had continued to go for a while, and by the time they came to me, her husband was taking her to Bible study just so that they could babysit her, and they all were totally aware, but they would keep her at Bible study so he could go buy groceries, so he could go get gas for the car, just, the kinds of things, that just, he could gas up, but he had to take her out of the car because she'd fiddle with stuff in the car or get out and walk away while he was at the pump. And so it was very frustrating for him. So she actually was attending Bible study and reading the text and participating. Conversations, month 3, she began answering the phone. She couldn't always carry on a lengthy conversation, but she knew when the phone rang that she needed to pick it up. And generally her husband said she would say hello, and then if it was someone that wasn't going to talk to her or she didn't know who it was, she would say a little telephone, and she would hand him the phone if it was, a business call or whatever. Month 4, they had a wedding anniversary party. Their children had a wedding anniversary party for them, and she recognized people at the party and was able to converse with them without getting lost in the conversation, without getting confused in a room full of multiple, it wasn't just like one-on-one. There were a number of people coming up and speaking with her, and she was able to function. Month 6, she began initiating conversations with me. Up until that point, probably by month 4 or 5, I could ask her to, move your arm, turn this way, and she would follow my directions. If I asked her if it hurt, it was always no. She limped in like this, so her husband said her right leg's not right. So I asked her, I said, does it hurt? No. At month 6, she just spontaneously one day said to me, you know what? It was all in there. I knew everything you were saying to me. I just couldn't get it out. She said stuff went around and around and around and around my head, and she said it was like, it's like, Peggy, why don't you flap your elbows and see if you can fly up to the ceiling and touch your head on it? And she said it was just that impossible. Everything in there was working, but the mechanism to get everything out or to get the body to do what the mind was understanding was not there. Here's with the limp. She said, presented with the right side limp, but answered no each time she was asked about foot pain. However, month 5, she said, my right knee has hurt me for years. My mom had the same thing, and oh yeah, my head burns and hurts too. And so then we began, it was easier when she told me what where the pain was in her body. I had scanned and I had picked things up at the ankle, I'd picked things up at the hip, I'd picked things up at the knee. She didn't particularly like me working on her leg. That was one thing. When I would start to work on it, she'd pull it away and push my hand back up toward her head. She later said that she'd lived with a sore right leg like forever, so it really didn't make any difference, and she wanted me to work on her head because that was more impactful and made her feel better than the knee that she said, I can take Tylenol for that. You know, I don't need some, but for that I could just take some drugs and be done. But the drugs weren't doing anything for her head. So she wanted the Simon time spent on her head, not on her body. By the 3rd month, she was able to understand that it was necessary, what the finger stick was necessary for. Prior to that, when she would see him get the kid out, she, you know, it was like a little child. She was trying to run away, trying to get away. She didn't know why he wanted to hurt her. And she even began to say, you know, I have to be careful what I eat because it makes my sugar go up and down. Here's this was a 6-month where she told me that we're going out after we leave here, we're going to lunch, and I have to be really careful because my sugar was high this morning, so I guess no dessert. So again, the higher level functioning that she realized, the whole implication of the food and the insulin and all of that. Here's just a chart that I made up that shows activities of daily living, which is one of the buzzwords in the health industry, whether or not you can get, you know, sometimes they have community health that comes in, or home health nurse aides, or different things based upon the percentage of daily activities that you can do. And you can see initially she was at 0 for driving and meal prep and reading and conversation and family names and pain and medication. And after the 1st month, she started doing better with family names. And month 3 I haven't read because something happened. Month 3, I don't know what it was, but it was like all of a sudden everything was working together, and kind of several areas came on board, as it were. And by month 6, she was doing really well. Here's just for those of you that like graphs. Yeah, some people would say, you know, I'm a word person, and somebody was looking at this. She said, "Don't you have any graphs?" I'm like, "Oh God, I don't do math. I hate graphs." She said, "Peggy, you're going to have people out there that like graphs, so make a graph." So this took me probably longer than the whole rest of the presentation to put together and figure out how to do these silly graphs, but here they are. Activities of daily living. The yellow is at the initial session. You can see where she was. Comprehension and reading was totally absent. And then after 12 SIMA sessions, she had gotten, that's the red one, you can see she'd gone to around between 20 and 40% on some of them, and some a little over. And then by 24 sessions, she was up to about 100% on everything most of the time, following directions, depending upon how complicated the direction was. That's why I didn't put it at 100%. If you went too fast or gave her too many directions, she didn't do well. Some of the extra codes that I did not put on here in this list that I did in following months, one of them that I just used intuitively was the code for Down syndrome. I had no idea why. It just seemed like, you know, well, that's a brain issue, that's a cognition issue, so I used that also. And right before I came, when I was working on the PowerPoint and looking at some of the stuff online, there was a new article that was just out that they have taken pictures of the brain with some of their scanning equipment, and they have found that some of the entanglements that they see in the nerve fibers in the brains of patients who have Down syndrome look very similar to the entanglements in the nerve tissue of the patients who have Alzheimer's. So now they're thinking they may be one step closer to looking at, just like they found the genetic link for Down syndrome, now they're thinking they may be closer to finding a genetic link or something on the DNA for Alzheimer's. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, I'll bet that's why I was intuitively led to do Down syndrome for the Alzheimer's patient. She was doing much better. At the end of 6 months, they began coming once a month for just kind of a recheck. We did that for probably a year, and she was continuing to function. Things things were tweaking and being more consistent. Her husband reported to me that he thought that she was functioning much better, but that her ability to reason was a little off, because one day she took the car and drove to the Bible study had been changed, wasn't at the church, and it was going to be someplace else, and he was doing something, and she got the phone call, so she just got in the car rather than have him drive her. She thought she wouldn't bother him, he was busy, and he came up for whatever he was doing, and she was gone, and she had taken the car and driven to Bible study herself. So then after that, he made sure that the keys were always in his pocket so that she couldn't get them. And he said evidently she did fine because she drove over, picked up some other woman, and the two of them went together. And so he called this woman, and he's, you know, when he found out, he called her, he said, you know, what were you thinking? And she said, well, I don't know. She said, she's doing so well. And she said, I just assumed, you know, she was driving again. Said she did a fine job.